Okay, let's break it down. September 11th, 2001. A horrific day that changed everything. But what came next wasn't just about finding the people responsible. It was about starting a machine called the War on Terror. This wasn't a war against a country with an army and a flag. It was a war against an idea, a tactic. And who did America decide was the face of that idea? Pretty much anyone who looked like my uncle. The US government, fueled by fear and anger, received a blank check to go after terrorists anywhere in the world. This wasn't a limited mission, it was a forever mission. And it set the stage for decades of conflict aimed overwhelmingly at Muslim populations across the globe. To power this new war machine, America needed new rules, so Congress passed the Authorization for Use of Military Force, or AUMF. Think of it as the ultimate hall pass for the military. It basically said the president could use force against anyone, anywhere, anytime, if they were even loosely connected to 9/11. Then came the Patriot Act. This thing was a beast. It gave the government sweeping new powers for surveillance. Suddenly, your library records, your emails, your phone calls, all fair game. These laws created a two-tiered system of justice, one for regular Americans and another, much harsher one, for Muslims who were now viewed with permanent suspicion. This legal framework wasn't just about fighting bad guys abroad. It created a climate of fear right here at home. Mosques were put under surveillance. FBI informants were sent into Muslim communities. People with names like Muhammad or Fatima were suddenly on no-fly lists for reasons they were never told. It was a classic case of collective punishment. A few extremists commit a terrible crime and suddenly 1.8 billion people around the world have to answer for it. This wasn't about security, it was about control. It was about creating a legal and social system where being Muslim was, by default, suspicious. The whole concept of military commissions was another game changer, and not in a good way. These were special military courts set up just for non-citizens suspected of terrorism. They had different rules of evidence, lower standards for conviction, and were designed to get quick, tough results. This meant you could be tried and sentenced based on evidence that wouldn't be allowed in a normal US court. This entire legal architecture, built in the shadow of 9/11, effectively stripped away fundamental rights from a specific group of people: Muslims. It was the legal engine that would drive the wars, the detentions, and the suffering for the next 2 decades. So, with the legal paperwork sorted, where did the war machine go first? Destination Afghanistan? The mission was to topple the Taliban and find Osama bin Laden. Simple, right? Except it wasn't. The war dragged on for 20 years. 20 years. That's longer than I've been doing comedy. What started as a hunt for Al-Qaeda became a massive nation-building project that ultimately failed. The human cost was staggering. Hundreds of thousands of Afghan civilians were killed in the crossfire, in drone strikes, and from the chaos the war created. The US spent trillions of dollars, not to build a stable country, but to sustain a conflict that left Afghanistan in ruins. Then, in 2003, the war machine pivoted. The new target was Iraq. The justification? Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. Spoiler alert, he didn't. This war was sold to the American public on a lie. The invasion and the subsequent occupation shattered Iraqi society. It unleashed a wave of sectarian violence that killed hundreds of thousands of Iraqis and displaced millions more. We went in to liberate them, but we ended up destroying their country and creating the very instability that allowed extremist groups like ISIS to thrive. The legacy of the Iraq War isn't freedom. It's a generation of Iraqis who have known nothing but violence and loss. But it didn't stop there. The War on Terror was a franchise, and it started opening new locations. The US military got involved in Pakistan, Yemen, Syria, Libya, and Somalia. The main weapon of choice? Drones. These unmanned planes could strike targets from thousands of miles away, which sounds clean and precise. But on the ground, it's a different story. For every high-value target killed, countless civilians, men, women, and children, were also eliminated. These strikes happened at weddings, funerals, and in homes. The US government calls it collateral damage, but for the families on the ground, it's just called murder. These undeclared wars destabilized entire regions. The numbers are just mind-numbing. A 2023 study from Brown University estimated that the post-9/11 wars have led to the deaths of at least 4.5 million people. Let that sink in. 4.5 million. That's more than the entire population of Los Angeles. And these are just the direct deaths. The indirect deaths from disease, starvation, and the destruction of infrastructure are even higher. For the millions of Muslim families affected, this isn't a distant news story. It's the reality they live with every single day. It's the empty chair at the dinner table, the destroyed home, the lost future. It's a wound that never gets a chance to heal. If the wars were the battlefields, Guantanamo Bay was the laboratory. It's a U.S. naval base in Cuba, which means it was deliberately chosen to be outside the reach of the U.S. legal system. It's the place where the rules just don't apply. After 9/11, the U.S. rounded up nearly 800 men and boys, almost all of them Muslim, from around the world and shipped them to Gitmo. They were labeled enemy combatants, a made-up term that meant they had no rights as prisoners of war under the Geneva Conventions and no rights as defendants in the U.S. criminal justice system. They were trapped in a legal black hole. What happened inside Guantanamo Bay is the stuff of nightmares. Detainees were subjected to what the government called enhanced interrogation techniques. That's a fancy bureaucratic way of saying torture. They were waterboarded, sleep-deprived for days, held in stress positions, and subjected to extreme temperatures and psychological abuse. The goal wasn't just to get information, it was to break them. Many of these men were held for years, some for over 2 decades, without ever being charged with a crime. They were never given a trial, never allowed to see the evidence against them, and never given a chance to prove their innocence. It was indefinite detention, plain and simple. Think about the sheer injustice of it. Imagine being kidnapped, flown to a remote island, and locked in a cage for half your life with no explanation. The alleged masterminds of the 9/11 attacks, like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, have been stuck in pre-trial hearings for 16 years. Why? Because the government can't prosecute them without revealing that the key evidence was obtained through torture. In 2024, a plea deal was on the table to finally get a conviction in exchange for taking the death penalty off the table. But it was revoked. So the show goes on, a never-ending legal circus that makes a mockery of American justice. Today, dozens of men still remain at Guantanamo. Most of them have been cleared for release for years, but they are still there, trapped by politics and bureaucracy. The U.S. doesn't know what to do with them. We broke them, and now we don't want to deal with the consequences. For the vast majority of the men held at Gitmo, there has been no apology, no compensation, no justice. Guantanamo Bay stands as a permanent monument to America's willingness to abandon its own ideals. It is a symbol of how, in the name of fighting monsters, we created a monstrous system of our own. So you have the wars, the deaths, the torture. But there's one more piece to this puzzle, the story. How is this all presented to the American people? The official narrative, pushed by politicians and amplified by a lot of the media, is a simple one. America is the hero, fighting a necessary war against evil terrorists. In this story, Muslims are almost always cast as the perpetrators, the threat, the problem. Their victimhood is erased. When a U.S. drone strike kills a family of 10 in Afghanistan, it's a tragic mistake. When a Muslim man is wrongfully imprisoned for 20 years, he's just an unfortunate footnote. This narrative control is incredibly effective. It ensures there is almost no accountability. U.S. law makes it nearly impossible for non-citizens to sue the government for wrongful death that happens overseas. The military sometimes offers condolence payments, but these are tiny sums of money, given without any admission of wrongdoing. Remember the Afghan family of 10 killed by a drone strike in Kabul in 2021? The U.S. promised to help the survivors. They're still waiting. For every story of a victim that gets a little bit of press, there are thousands, millions that are never told. They are the silent, invisible casualties of this war. This erasure of Muslim suffering has real consequences. It justifies the continuation of the wars and the policies that fuel them. If the public only ever hears about Muslim terrorists and never about Muslim victims, they're not going to demand change. They're not going to question the trillions of dollars spent or the laws that erode civil liberties. This is how the forever war becomes truly forever. It runs on a fuel of public ignorance and apathy, which is made possible by a story that constantly reinforces the idea that they are the problem, not us. The narrative itself becomes a weapon. This is why it is so crucial to tell the other side of the story. We have to remember the victims, not just as statistics, but as people. We have to remember Wadi al-Fayoumi, the 6-year-old Palestinian-American boy murdered in Illinois in a hate crime fueled by anti-Muslim rhetoric. We have to remember the millions of Iraqis, Afghans, Syrians, and Yemenis whose lives and countries have been shattered. Remembering them is not about assigning blame, it's about acknowledging the truth. It's about restoring their humanity. It's the first and most necessary step toward ensuring that this dark chapter of history is never ever repeated. We have to see the people, not just the policy,